My name is Hannah Mercer. 3 weeks ago, my mother called me for the first time in 19 years. When I saw her name on my phone, I almost didn't answer. Not because I hated her. Not because I was angry. Because for 19 years, I had trained myself not to expect anything from that number. Then it started ringing. Again. And again. 3 calls in less than 10 minutes. The fourth call left a voicemail. I listened to it while standing alone in the parking lot outside our manufacturing facility just north of Boise. Hannah, sweetheart, we need to talk. Sweetheart. That word hit me harder than I expected. My mother had not called me sweetheart since I was 21 years old. Back when she still claimed I was her daughter. Back before she stood in our living room and watched her husband throw me out of the house. Back before she told the entire town that I had stolen from my own family. The voicemail continued. There are things we should discuss. Family things. Important things. Then she hung up. No apology. No explanation. No mention of 19 years. Just family things. I stared at my phone for a long time. The timing wasn't a coincidence. 3 days earlier, a national business magazine had published an article about my company. 2 days earlier, a major environmental corporation had publicly announced its intent to acquire us. The estimated value of the deal was $120 million. And suddenly my mother wanted to talk about family. Funny how that works. But here's what she didn't know. For 19 years, I had kept every document. Every letter. Every bank statement. Every court filing. Every accusation. Every lie. 34 records. Stored inside a dented green metal archive box that sat in the bottom shelf of my office closet. Most people keep family photos. I kept evidence. Not because I planned revenge. Because I never wanted anyone rewriting what happened. And now, after 19 years, someone was finally trying. Before I tell you how my mother ended up sitting across from me in a corporate boardroom surrounded by attorneys, executives, and 34 pieces of documented history, you need to understand how a girl from a dying farming town became the family villain. The story starts in 2009. The year my father died. And the year everything valuable disappeared. Including me. The town of Ashton Falls sat in southern Idaho surrounded by farmland and dry hills. Population, 3,100. One grocery store. One gas station. One church. One place where everybody knew everybody else's business before breakfast. My father, Daniel Mercer, was a farmer. Not a wealthy farmer. Not a powerful farmer. Just the kind of man who woke up before sunrise every day and worked until his hands cracked. When I was growing up, I thought he could fix anything. Engines. Fences. Broken irrigation lines. Even broken hearts. At least that's what it felt like. Then cancer arrived. And suddenly there was something he couldn't fix. I was 16 when he died. My mother was 42. The funeral happened on a cold October morning. By November, people had already started asking when Mom would remarry. Small towns move fast. Grief moves slow. Those two things rarely get along. 18 months later, she married Richard Collins. Richard owned a construction company. He drove expensive trucks. Wore expensive watches. And somehow managed to make every conversation about himself. He also came with a son. Tyler. 2 years older than me. If Richard was loud, Tyler was louder. The kind of person who treated rules like personal insults. The kind of person who always had a new business idea and never had a paycheck. Mom adored them both. Maybe because they filled the silence Dad left behind. Maybe because loneliness makes people overlook things. Either way, within a year, they weren't guests. They were the center of the household. And I was becoming an outsider in my own home. At first, it was small things. Family dinners scheduled without telling me. Vacations discussed after they were already booked. Photos where everyone somehow stood together while I ended up on the edge. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make you wonder if you're imagining it. Then came the settlement money. After my father's death, a state transportation project purchased part of our farmland. The compensation was substantial. Nearly $380,000. The money was supposed to remain in a trust until my mother retired. At least that's what the legal paperwork said. I only knew about it because Dad had shown me the documents before he got sick. He believed children should understand how things worked. Especially money. Especially promises. 5 years later, I was studying civil engineering at college when I came home for Thanksgiving. During dinner, Tyler mentioned buying a fishing boat. A very expensive fishing boat. Richard joked about upgrading his truck again. Something felt wrong. A few weeks later, curiosity turned into concern. Concern turned into research. Research turned into panic. Because the trust account was nearly empty. I checked the public filings twice. Then 3 times. I thought I had made a mistake. I hadn't. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were gone. Transferred. Withdrawn. Moved through accounts connected to Richard's business. At first I tried to explain it away. Maybe there was paperwork I hadn't seen. Maybe there was an investment strategy. Maybe there was a legal explanation. There wasn't. What I found instead was a trail. And that trail led directly to Richard Collins. The man my mother trusted more than anyone. The man who now controlled every financial decision in the family. The man who had somehow convinced everyone that asking questions was the same thing as causing trouble. I spent 2 months collecting information. Quietly. Carefully. I wasn't trying to expose anyone. I just wanted answers. Then I made the mistake that changed my life. I asked for them. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon. January 2010. I remember because snow covered the fields outside. I remember because I believed truth mattered. And because by the end of that day, I would learn that truth and family are not always on the same side. Richard was sitting in the living room watching football. Tyler was scrolling through his phone. Mom was folding laundry. I placed the documents on the coffee table. And asked one simple question. Where did Dad's money go? The room went silent. For 3 seconds. Then everything exploded. The room went silent. Not confused silent. Not surprised silent. Guilty silent. Richard's eyes moved to the paperwork. Then to me. Then back to the paperwork. For a moment, I thought he might explain. I thought maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe some transaction I didn't understand. Maybe some legal arrangement nobody had told me about. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed. A short, dismissive sound. Hannah's been playing detective. Tyler smirked. Mom looked uncomfortable. But nobody answered the question. So I asked again. Where did the money go? Richard leaned back in his chair. You're a college kid. You don't understand finances. I slid another document across the table. A transfer record. Then another. And another. Every one of them showed money leaving the trust. Every one connected to companies Richard controlled. The smile disappeared. Tyler sat up straighter. My mother stopped folding laundry. For the first time, I realized they weren't surprised by what I had found. They were surprised I had found it. That difference changed everything. Hannah, Mom said softly. Maybe this isn't the right time. The right time. I had always hated that phrase. The right time never comes when people benefit from silence. Dad wanted that money protected. Richard's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. I'm asking a question. And I'm telling you to stop. Something shifted in the room. The discussion was no longer about the money. It was about authority. Richard wasn't defending the transfers. He was defending his right not to explain them. And my mother was letting him. That hurt more than I expected. I looked at her. Not him. Her. Because Richard wasn't the person who had raised me. She was. Mom, did you know? She didn't answer. I asked again. Did you know the account was almost empty? Still silence. That was my answer. The worst part wasn't discovering the money was gone. The worst part was realizing she already knew. I remember standing there thinking something very simple. If she knows, then she's choosing this. Choosing him. Choosing his son. Choosing the lie. Over me. Over Dad. Over everything Dad had tried to leave behind. Richard stood up. The conversation was over as far as he was concerned. You need to leave. I laughed because I genuinely thought he was joking. Leave? This was my home. The house my father had built. The house where my height was still marked on the pantry door. The house where every room contained some piece of my childhood. Then Tyler stood up too. And suddenly nobody looked like they were joking. Mom still hadn't said a word. Hannah, Richard said again. Get out. I looked at my mother. Waiting. Hoping. Begging without saying it. All she had to do was speak. One sentence. One objection. One sign that I mattered. She lowered her eyes. And kept folding the same towel. I don't remember picking up my backpack. I don't remember walking outside. I only remember the cold. And the sound of the front door closing behind me. The house looked exactly the same. But somehow it wasn't mine anymore. A week later things got worse. Much worse. The rumor started at church. Then spread to the grocery store. Then the gas station. Then everywhere else. According to the new version of events, I wasn't the girl asking questions. I was the girl trying to steal family assets. Funny how quickly a story changes when the people telling it control the audience. Within a month, half the town believed I had attempted to take money from my widowed mother. The details didn't matter. The facts didn't matter. The story was simpler than the truth. And simple stories spread faster. I lost friends. Neighbors stopped talking to me. People I'd known since kindergarten suddenly acted like strangers. One woman actually told me she hoped I learned respect. Respect. For exposing theft. That was the year I learned something important. Most people don't choose between truth and lies. They choose between comfort and discomfort. And truth is often uncomfortable. Especially when it threatens someone popular. Especially when it threatens someone's image. Richard knew that. He counted on it. And he was right. For a while. I moved into a tiny apartment near campus. 600 square feet. Bad plumbing. Terrible heating. A refrigerator that made noises like a dying tractor. But it was mine. The first few months were brutal. I worked part-time. Went to class. Ate too many instant noodles. Pretended I wasn't devastated. The pretending part was the hardest. People talk about heartbreak like it's romantic. It isn't. Sometimes heartbreak is just realizing your own mother chose someone else's version of reality over yours. That kind of pain doesn't look dramatic. It looks like exhaustion. Like staring at your phone. Like checking messages you already know aren't there. Like hoping every unknown number might finally be someone saying they made a mistake. Nobody ever called. Not my mother. Not Tyler. Not Richard. Nobody. Then one rainy Thursday evening, everything changed. Because that was the night I met Ethan Brooks. At the time, he was standing knee-deep in mud. Arguing with a park ranger. About a goose. I wish I were kidding. I really do. But that is exactly how we met. I was leaving a volunteer engineering project near a wildlife preserve. He was trying to rescue an injured Canada goose. The goose was trying to murder him. The ranger was trying not to laugh. And Ethan was losing badly. I stood there watching for almost 5 minutes. Finally, I walked over and asked if he needed help. The goose immediately attacked me too. Which, strangely enough, became the beginning of a very important relationship. Not with the goose. With Ethan. He was a wildlife photographer. Patient. Quiet. Observant. The kind of person who listened before speaking. The complete opposite of everyone I had grown up around. Our first date lasted 4 hours. The second lasted 6. The third ended with him admitting he had Googled how to treat goose bites before meeting me. That was when I knew he might actually be worth keeping around. But what mattered most wasn't the jokes. It wasn't the dates. It wasn't even the relationship. It was the fact that Ethan never asked me to prove my version of events. When I told him about my family, he didn't interrogate me. He didn't play devil's advocate. He didn't ask what I might have done wrong. He simply listened. Sometimes that matters more than advice. Sometimes being believed is enough. Maybe that's why I eventually told him everything. About Dad. About the trust. About Richard. About the rumors. About the house. About the day I got thrown out. When I finished, Ethan sat quietly for a moment. Then he asked one question. Do you still have the documents? I nodded. All of them. Good. Why? He shrugged. Because people who lie usually count on everyone else forgetting. I remember those words. Because 19 years later they would matter more than either of us realized. That weekend I bought a small green metal archive box at a second-hand office supply store. Nothing special. A little rusted. A little dented. Cost $12. I put every document inside. Not for revenge. Not for court. Not for some future confrontation. I kept them because they were real. And after what happened, real things mattered. At the time there were only 7 records. 7 pieces of paper. 7 reminders. I had no idea that one day there would be 34. And I definitely had no idea those 34 records would eventually bring my entire family crashing down. For a long time, nothing happened. That might sound strange. Most people expect dramatic stories to be filled with dramatic moments. Mine wasn't. Most of it looked ordinary. Which is exactly why it hurt. Because while everyone else moved on, I stayed stuck between 2 realities. The life I was building. And the family I had lost. Ethan and I got married 3 years later. No giant wedding. No fancy venue. No hundreds of guests. Just a small ceremony outside Boise in early autumn. 42 people attended. Most were friends. Some were co-workers. A few were people who had become family simply because they consistently showed up. My mother wasn't there. Neither was Richard. Neither was Tyler. I mailed an invitation anyway. Not because I expected them to come. Because I wanted to know. I wanted certainty. Sometimes certainty hurts less than hope. The invitation came back unopened. 3 weeks after the wedding. I added it to the archive box. Record number 8. Then I closed the lid. And went back to living my life. 2 years later Ethan and I adopted a little girl named Lily. She was 7 years old. Small for her age. Quiet. Careful. The kind of child who apologized for taking up space. Her father had been killed overseas while serving in the military. Her mother had died shortly afterward. By the time we met her, she had already learned lessons no child should have to learn. The first 6 months were difficult. Trust takes time. Especially when life teaches you people leave. One night she asked me something I'll never forget. How do you know if somebody is really family? I expected a child's question. What I got sounded like something much older. I thought about it for a long time. Then answered honestly. The people who stay. She nodded. Like someone filing away important information. Years later I would realize she understood that answer better than most adults. The company started by accident. At least that's how it felt. I was working as a municipal water systems engineer. Most people don't think much about water. Until it disappears. The western United States was facing increasing drought problems. Cities were losing millions of gallons every year through aging infrastructure. The technology existed to reduce waste. The problem was cost. Smaller communities couldn't afford it. I became obsessed with solving that problem. At first it was research. Then prototypes. Then late nights. Then weekends. Then a small business. Then a company. Then suddenly 20 employees. Then 50. Then 100. Every year things grew. Not explosively. Steadily. The kind of growth built on solving actual problems. By 2025 our monitoring systems operated in 6 states. By 2026 we had government contracts. By 2027 industry publications were calling us innovators. I hated that word. Innovator. It sounded like something people said when they didn't understand what you actually did. I preferred engineer. Engineers solve problems. That was enough. The archive box remained on the shelf. Most years I never opened it. Life was busy. Work. Family. Travel. School events. Birthday parties. Soccer games. Normal things. Good things. But every once in a while something would arrive. A rumor. A letter. A message from someone back home. And another record would join the others. Record 13. A church newsletter listing Tyler as the manager of property partially purchased using trust assets. Record 16. A local newspaper article about Richard's company filing for financial restructuring. Record 21. A court filing connected to unpaid loans. Record 24. A tax lien. Record 27. Another. Patterns started emerging. Not emotional patterns. Financial patterns. The kind engineers notice. The kind accountants notice. The kind liars hope nobody notices. Richard's empire wasn't growing. It was shrinking. Slowly. Year after year. Bad decisions. Bad debt. Bad planning. And Tyler seemed determined to make every situation worse. Failed businesses. Failed partnerships. Failed investments. Every few years I heard another story. None of it brought me satisfaction. I wasn't waiting for them to fail. I had spent too many years rebuilding my own life to enjoy watching someone else's collapse. But I did notice something. Nobody contacted me. Not during the hard years. Not during the bankruptcies. Not during the lawsuits. Not during the tax problems. Silence. Complete silence. Until the acquisition announcement. Then suddenly everything changed. The article appeared on a Wednesday morning. National circulation. Full-page feature. A photograph of me standing inside our production facility. Arms crossed. Safety glasses on my head. Trying very hard not to look uncomfortable. The headline called me a visionary. I nearly threw the magazine away. Lily framed it. That should tell you everything about our personalities. 3 days later came the acquisition announcement. $120 million. The largest environmental technology acquisition in Idaho that year. Reporters called. Investors called. Competitors called. People I hadn't spoken to in 15 years called. Then came my mother. After 19 years. Not coincidentally. Not accidentally. Exactly on schedule. Because money travels faster than apologies. 3 days after her voicemail, another message arrived. This one was a text. Short. Carefully written. Hannah, I would like to see you. There are important family matters we should discuss. Important family matters. Not. I'm sorry. Not. I miss you. Not. Can we talk? Important family matters. I stared at the screen. Then laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. 19 years. No birthdays. No Christmas cards. No wedding. No adoption. No graduations. No life. Then suddenly family matters. I didn't reply. 2 days later she sent another message. Then another. Then another. By the end of the week she had contacted me more times than she had during the previous 19 years combined. That was when something unusual happened. Our receptionist received a visitor. A man claiming to be a market researcher. He asked questions about the company. Revenue. Ownership structure. Future plans. The receptionist refused to answer. The next day another stranger appeared. This time asking about executive compensation. Then someone requested public records connected to our property holdings. Not illegal. Not dangerous. Just curious. Very curious. Almost like someone was gathering information. Building a profile. Creating a report. And suddenly I remembered something. Richard Collins never asked questions unless money was involved. A week later I received confirmation. An old friend from Ashton Falls called me. Her voice sounded nervous. Hannah, I think you should know something. What? A pause. Then. Your mother has been asking about your net worth. I didn't say anything. She continued. Not casually. Specifically. Another pause. She wants numbers. There it was. The real reason. Not family. Not reconciliation. Not regret. Math. 19 years later they were finally interested in math. Unfortunately for them. Math happened to be my strongest subject. And I had 19 years of records waiting in a green metal box. The meeting request arrived the following Monday. Not from my mother. From an attorney. That detail told me everything. The email was professionally written. Polite. Careful. Strategic. The attorney explained that certain members of my family hoped to discuss opportunities for future cooperation and mutual support. Mutual support. Interesting phrase. I had not heard from these people in 19 years. Now suddenly they wanted cooperation. I declined. 30 minutes later my mother called again. This time I answered. For the first few seconds neither of us spoke. 19 years creates a lot of silence. Finally she cleared her throat. Hannah. Her voice sounded older. Smaller. Not weaker. Just older. Hello, Mom. The word felt strange. Like speaking a language I hadn't used in years. I've missed you. No. She had missed something. But it wasn't me. I let the silence stretch. Eventually she continued. There are things we should discuss face to face. What things? A pause. Then. The future. There it was again. The future. People always want to discuss the future when they don't want to discuss the past. I think we've discussed enough. Hannah. No. Another silence. Then she said something unexpected. I'm coming to Boise. Not asking. Informing. Just like old times. I almost smiled. The difference was that 19 years ago she could make decisions for me. Now she couldn't. Do whatever you think is best. Then I hung up. 2 weeks later the acquisition signing ceremony arrived. It was scheduled in our headquarters conference center. Lawyers. Executives. Investors. Auditors. $100 million transaction generates a lot of paperwork. By 9 in the morning the building was full. By 10 everything was ready. At 10:17 our receptionist called my office. Hannah? Yes? I think you should come downstairs. Something in her voice told me this wasn't business. I walked into the lobby. And there they were. My mother. Richard. Tyler. All standing together. The first thing I noticed was how much older they looked. The second thing I noticed was that Tyler looked terrified. The third thing I noticed was the folder in Richard's hand. A folder. Of course. People like Richard always bring paperwork when they want something. Mom smiled when she saw me. Not warmly. Nervously. As though she expected a different version of this meeting. One where 19 years hadn't happened. Hannah. I nodded. Nobody moved. Nobody hugged. Nobody pretended. That part was over. Richard finally stepped forward. We need to talk. No, I said. You need to talk. His jaw tightened. Some habits never change. We came all this way. So did I. He didn't understand at first. Then I watched realization hit him. I wasn't talking about Idaho. I was talking about 19 years. They followed me upstairs. Not because I invited them. Because security wouldn't remove them unless I asked. And honestly? I wanted this finished. Once. Completely. No loose ends. No unanswered questions. No future surprises. The acquisition team had already gathered inside the boardroom. So had our legal counsel. 3 investors. 2 auditors. A dozen executives. Not exactly the audience my family expected. My mother stopped when she saw everyone. Richard looked uncomfortable. Tyler looked sick. Good. Truth often produces that reaction. I sat at the end of the conference table. They sat opposite me. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Richard opened his folder. And finally revealed why they were here. Tyler owed nearly $3 million. Failed investments. Personal guarantees. Business debts. Private loans. Everything had collapsed. The banks were closing in. Creditors were preparing lawsuits. Assets were disappearing. And somehow, they believed I should help. Actually, that isn't accurate. They believed I should rescue them. Because we were family. Family. The same word that disappeared for 19 years. Funny how certain words become valuable when money is involved. My mother began crying. Real tears this time. Or at least better ones. We made mistakes. Mistakes. Such a small word. For 19 years. Richard talked about sacrifice. Tyler talked about second chances. My mother talked about healing. Not one of them talked about accountability. Eventually they stopped. Waiting. Expecting. Hoping. Then it was my turn. I stood up. Walked to the side wall. And rolled in a small green metal archive box. The room became very quiet. I placed it on the table. Richard frowned. What is that? I opened the lid. 34 files. Neatly organized. Dated. Labeled. Documented. 19 years of history. That, I said quietly. Is the conversation you avoided. Then I began. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Factually. Record 1. Trust transfer documentation. Record 2. Withdrawal authorization. Record 3. Property acquisition. Record 4. Public statements. Record 5. Church records. Record 6. Returned correspondence. 1 by 1. Year by year. Lie by lie. The room stayed silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Because documents don't argue. They simply exist. 40 minutes later I reached the final file. Record 34. A private investigator invoice. Paid 3 months earlier. Commissioned by Richard Collins. Purpose. Asset research. Net worth estimation. Corporate ownership analysis. The room froze. I slid the document across the table. Richard's face lost all color. There it was. The entire truth. Not family. Not healing. Not reconciliation. Research. Valuation. Target assessment. A financial operation disguised as a reunion. One investor actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. My mother started crying again. But nobody was looking at her anymore. The performance had ended. The evidence had arrived. What do you want from me? I asked. Nobody answered. So I asked again. What exactly do you want? Finally Tyler spoke. The first honest thing anyone had said all day. We need help. There it was. Simple. Direct. True. I respected that answer more than everything else they had said combined. I looked at him. Then at my mother. Then at Richard. And finally gave them mine. No. The word landed like a stone. My mother closed her eyes. Richard looked furious. Tyler looked defeated. I continued. I'm not saying no because of the money. That surprised them. I'm saying no because helping you would require pretending none of this happened. I touched the archive box. 19 years happened. I looked directly at my mother. You don't get to erase them because the outcome became expensive. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. The math was complete. 3 months later the acquisition closed. Life continued. Lily started college. Ethan spent 6 weeks photographing wildlife in Alaska. The company entered a new chapter. And the archive box returned to the shelf. Exactly where it belonged. Then, almost a year later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From my mother. No requests. No financial discussions. No excuses. Just 6 pages. And one sentence that mattered. I should have chosen my daughter. I read it twice. Then put it away. Some apologies arrived too late to repair the damage. But not too late to acknowledge the truth. I never wrote back. Not because I was angry. Because the story was finished. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. One is something you give yourself. The other must be earned. My mother finally understood that. 19 years later. And that was enough. The green archive box still sits on a shelf in my office. 34 records. A lifetime of evidence. Most people think the box represents revenge. They're wrong. It represents memory. Because the people who rewrite history depend on one thing. They depend on you forgetting. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remember. Not to stay angry. Not to get even. Simply to tell the truth. And let the truth do what it always does. Stand on its own.